Hi, so I'm Harmony Bench. I'm one of the co-conveners of audiences and online reception before and after COVID. I'm associate professor in the Department of Dance.
And I'm Yana Hyshamova, professor of Slavic and Film Studies, based in the Department of Slavic and East European Languages and Cultures. And my work has been related to the theory of audience studies and reception, mostly connected to my last book, which is Screening Trafficking, Prudent and Perilous. And I'm studying the local reception of global trafficking flows of images, film, and media.
I'm Hannah Kostrin, Associate Professor in the Department of Dance. And my project here ties into my current project about reception of Israeli choreographers in the United States.
Hi, I'm Danielle Scone. I'm a senior lecturer in the Department of Near Eastern Languages and Cultures. I'm also a lecturer in the Departments of Sociology and Political Science. And my project here was a continuation of my long-term field work with dislocated Roma in Istanbul, Turkey, and particularly with a hip hop group called Tarebadi Isyan.
Awesome. Well, I'm really excited to be here with you all today. I thought maybe we could just start by describing a little bit more in depth what each of us has been up to in relation to the audiences and online reception project. So each of you mentioned how it intersects with your research somewhat, but I'm wondering if we can hear a little bit more about what you did this past year, who you were engaged with, and who you were connecting with over this past year.
All right. I focused on actually one major aspect of audience and reception during before and after pandemic, the COVID pandemic. And it was a research project dedicated to the examination of the state's handling coverage of the Chernobyl disaster 35 years ago and now of the COVID pandemic. A graduate student and advisee of mine, Miriam Bainazar, did some research, which will turn out to be also her master thesis. And the interesting discovery on this is examining the archives of the Russian newspaper Pravda at the time to analyze the Soviet government's response and actually interviewing Soviet, well, today Russian citizens, but also for their recollection of the Soviet information of the pandemic, of the Chernobyl disaster, and comparing it to the way they today perceive the Russian government's coverage of the COVID disaster and or the COVID pandemic. The interesting finding here is that the majority of the interviews were critical of the information darkness during the Chernobyl, because the government took about 4 or 5 days and then started releasing very limited information and censored information. And now they view more positively the Russian government's handling of the pandemic, although this handling has been critiqued by many corners, but the participants base their perception on the fact that they were informed. Whether that information is accurate or not, they did not engage into this critical reflection. What mattered to them is that they were informed, and that they gave them the idea that they have no objections to the way the Russian government today has been keeping the citizens informed and has been responding to the pandemic. And the other interesting aspect of the work that we have done through this research is a commissioned documentary, again on Chernobyl and the reception, the understanding of the governments in this time, in this case, the Bulgarian government of the Chernobyl disaster and how it informed the citizens. And the documentary included 3 participants' interviews, as well as footage, documentary footage, and the recollections of 3 participants. And it also linked the views of these participants today to the information they have about COVID. And there have been very interesting findings there, again, on the basis of information, how important it is for governments to keep their citizens informed, in this case, more truthfully informed, factually informed. And then we had some conversations with 2 filmmakers, one acclaimed Russian-American filmmaker, Michael Lidov, another Serbian filmmaker, and a journalist and a former director of Radio Free Europe in Eastern Europe. So this has been actually the core of our activities on my side of the project. And as I mentioned, interesting findings when it comes to reception of events and how ordinary people perceive information.
Thanks, Jana. It sounds like part of what you're exploring is it doesn't really matter what the information is or what the information says, so long as it is forthcoming. Hannah, what about you?
Well, for this project, the core of my part was bringing in Israeli choreographers to do master classes, mostly in our dance classes in the Department of Dance. And then I also interviewed them separately. The choreographers who came were Alon Carniel, who is an improviser and a former dancer with the Vertigo Dance Company, also a Feldenkrais practitioner. And so he came in the fall and gave a Feldenkrais class. The second choreographer is Fetter, who is a choreographer based in Israel. And she zoomed in and gave a masterclass in her movement practice, which blends Ethiopian Eskesta dancing and Israeli contemporary practices. And then the third person who zoomed in was Danielle Agami, who is an Israeli-American choreographer based in Los Angeles. And she zoomed in and worked with us in a movement practice class that had some ideas from Gaga and some ideas from her own movement investigations. And then I had interviewed all of them separately. And so the things that I was thinking about with this part of the project were a couple of different things. The first thing was that these are 3 choreographers about whom I'm writing in my current project. And it's very important for me to engage with the people with whom, about whom I'm writing, both with their work, but also to get a sense of their movement practices. Because one of the things that I am working on in this project, which I'm calling kinesthetic peoplehood, is how people feel part of a diaspora based on movement practices, participating in them, watching them, being somehow involved with them. And I knew that during this, what has become a year, but we didn't know at the beginning that it would be a year, of the COVID-19 pandemic, is that I was not going to be able to travel to work with these people in a way that I had planned. And so bringing them in to have them give masterclasses in their movement practices was one way that I was able to access, in a sense, a kind of their movement practice. We were lucky with Fetter because we had brought her to OSU as a guest artist last year, right before the pandemic. And so it was nice to be able to engage with her on a repeat time and really deepen the work in that way. And then the other 2 choreographers and practitioners were people who I would not have otherwise been able to engage without the support of this grant. So on the one hand, I was able to get deeper into my knowledge of Fetter's work and really be exposed to the movement practice of Alon Carniel and Danielle Agami. And they came into my classes, so my students were also able to engage. Alon Carniel came into my Laban practices course in the fall, which is based in a very particular kind of notation and analysis, but the way that he led people through Feldenkrais really aligned with the kinds of movement analysis that we were doing in that class, of bringing different kinds of attention to the way that body parts move. And then in the spring, Fetter and Danielle Adami fit right into my Jewish and Israeli dance histories course that I was teaching this spring. So I was able to align directly with the course plan. And I collaborated on the Danielle Adami class with my colleague, Professor Crystal Michelle Perkins, because Danielle gave her master class during Crystal's class time. So we were able to bring my class and her class together for that and have kind of a broader experience. So one of the things that we were really able to gain from this project was a physical practice engagement and a little bit of composition with these choreographers. And then at the end of each master class, I asked the guest artist the same series of questions about how their work has been affected during the pandemic. And it was interesting having these conversations spread out over the year, because at the beginning of the pandemic, there was still a little bit of uncertainty about where we were and where we were coming from. Whereas at the end, there was more of a, like, this has happened, this is where things have gone. So I got a real sense for how artists working in Israel and the United States have been affected. And some of it was very consistent across the board, and some of it was a little bit different based on national contexts and lockdowns and that kind of thing, and who had access to what kind of audiences, online, in person, those kinds of things. So one of the things that I'm really taking away from this is the different ways that artists choose to engage in this kind of context, the way that they ascertain what makes the most sense for them and their art. Does it make the most sense for them to make small garden performances? Does it make the most sense for them to say, this isn't happening, I need to be in a theater, I'm going to do something else until it's over? And then the way that audiences and students and people engaging with their work respond to that say a lot about how that work is living in the world. So that was a really big takeaway for me. And then separately, the interviews that I conducted with them individually ranged from about 90 minutes to 2 hours, and were very much targeted towards their work and their processes. So I learned a lot more about their work and different kinds of ways that they are engaging, the way that they think about their Jewish identity, the way that they kind of imagine their work in the world, because there is not yet a lot of textual trails about these artists. So it was really exciting for me to get in and do that primary source work with them.
Great, thank you. It sounds like it's really important for you to really sit with how artists are changing their processes and their practices during this past year and change. But I also appreciated how you changed your process, your research practice, right? Adapting how you were going to do research given all of the COVID restrictions. And so it sounds like there were also some opportunities that opened up there. And I want to circle back to that, but let's hear from Danielle.
Sure, yeah. So last November, I was able to host a Turkish hip hop group called Talibati Isyan in 3 of my classes. And as I mentioned, this is a continuation of my research with dislocated Roma in Istanbul. And so a lot of things are intersecting for me here. One was that I had applied for a grant to bring this group to OSU in person. And then of course, after COVID, our grant allowed me to bring them here virtually, which was wonderful in terms of me being able to continue my research with them. I was able to interview them and keep discussing some of what I'm trying to work through. And then also, I was teaching 3 different classes, very different classes. And so it was so interesting to be able to invite my students from those 3 different classes and ask them to view the performance in different ways based on what it was that we were talking about in that class. So contemporary issues in Turkey was probably the most obvious fit in terms of just talking through current issues in politics and society, but in Turkey. But my sociology of immigration course, in that class, I asked them to think about the role of music in the politics of immigration. And then in my sociology of technology and global society, I asked them to think about this kind of new medium and how we consume music and music performance and what has changed now that we've had to kind of transition from in-person concerts and the like. So, you know, we were coming at it from all these different angles, which was really cool. And it meant that I could ask in the Q&A session, I could ask these guys very different questions about their experiences being performers on the computer. And they had wonderful answers. I mean, they are really working through, on the one hand, the lack of the energy that they get from a live audience. But on the other hand, their reach has really expanded over the last year. And they were already kind of working towards that, because rapping in Turkish does give them a limited audience, but hip hop is a global form. And so it's something that people all over the world are interested in. And it speaks to young people. So there's a familiarity in hip hop in terms of body language and rhythm and the sound, even if the language is not something you understand. So through YouTube in particular, over the last year, they have been able to reach a more global audience beyond the borders and boundaries of Turkey. And then what I'm also really interested in is the relationship between this hip hop group, who is made up of 2 young men who are Roma, or so-called gypsies, who were forcibly removed from their neighborhood in Istanbul, to incoming refugees from the Middle East, mainly Syria, and the way that hip hop is kind of mediating relationships between young people in Istanbul today. And so that it was another interesting thing to be able to talk about mobility and immobility, which was already an issue. And then of course, COVID brought that to the front.
Yeah, that last question of, you know, we kind of went into the pandemic with a certain politics around immigration, mobility, immobility, and then the script changes when you add a global pandemic on top of that. So my project kind of split down the middle. I was able to bring in a couple of folks from the Institute for Denim Technique Certification. They are responsible for preserving the legacy of Catherine Dunham through the practice and teaching of her technique, her dance technique. So Rachel Tavernier was able to give a masterclass for dance students here at OSU, and then Penny Godbaldo gave a lecture on the relevance of Dunham's thought to our particular moment, grappling not only with the uncertainty of the pandemic, but also racial justice during these times. So it was really early in our kind of collective experiment with what does it mean to teach dance online? What does it mean to give a masterclass online? And it was super interesting because it was hosted again in Crystal Michelle Perkins' course, and it required a lot of infrastructure. It required a lot of support to enable that to happen. You know, as a field of dancers, we've gotten a lot better at knowing like what it means to practice dance in an online space or mediated somehow through video conference like Zoom. But that was kind of a first foray into that, bringing people in to give masterclass experiences in the context of a higher education situation. And it was, you know, like a couple of you have said, you know, the circumstances were such that it wouldn't have happened otherwise. You know, it was one of those things where it was like, well, the technology made it suddenly possible to bring these folks in to do this work, even though it was a kind of a new thing. The other project I've been working on in the context of this work is I am co-editing a special issue of a journal, the International Journal of Screen Dance, and I'm co-editing that with an OSU alum, Alex Harlig, and that is specifically focused on what artists are doing in this kind of post-COVID, or well, the COVID contemporary, I guess. And we decided that not only would we do this special issue, but we were also going to do a symposium because that seemed like a really great idea. But we had a fantastic turnout. Nearly 300 people registered for the conference. You know, that's very good for a dance conference, and even better for a screen dance conference, which is quite a niche phenomenon. And we were able to gather people from all over the world. So again, something that probably wouldn't have happened in person, or would have been very difficult to make happen in person, suddenly seemed practical and reasonable in this kind of online Zoom land. So that was really exciting, and is something that I'm looking forward to kind of holding on to for the future. So I'm curious to hear from all of you. Well, some of you can respond in whatever way you want. But what are things that you noticed that the kind of opportunities that opened up, or the things that you didn't expect that suddenly came your way, and like this conference that otherwise would not have happened, suddenly seemed like, oh, of course we're gonna do that. What do you want to keep from this time?
Actually, what was already mentioned, I think, is that this platform made participation of more people possible. I mentioned one of our guests, the Russian-American filmmaker Michael Lidov, who has become one of the most important filmmakers actually filming in Russia today. And we would not have been able to bring him if we didn't have that opportunity with the Zoom. And actually he zoomed in from Cappadocia. So while he was on the set, this type of encounters and actually would not have been possible before, and it generated a lot of excitement and enthusiasm. We had over 50 participants from couple of classes, but also people from Boston and all over this country came to join the conversation. And what emerged during this conversation is also interesting as a takeaway. In film studies, and especially in the intersection between film studies and audience studies, for a while already, there has been a conversation about the participation of audiences and the shifting idea of audiences in film studies, from the multiplex theaters and the dark auditorium experience to the computer screen and now the mobile device. And we asked this question of Michael Lidov: what does he think of, what does COVID do to film in general, film creation and film viewing? And he was adamant in insisting that actually now the difference is totally blurred. At this point, there is no really a difference between the big screen, the dark auditorium, and all the small screen. The traditionalist film studies scholars will cringe when they hear this, because there is that school of thought that the dark auditorium creates a totally different experience for identification with the camera or with characters and so on and so forth. But I see his point, and as I mentioned, there has been already a conversation of what audience means in today's age. So that has been one of the most interesting takeaways. And also through this documentary, it was so interesting to basically commissioned within a 3-month period to bring voices from across the Atlantic to our classroom and to see how students could engage in almost very real time with these points of view and the creation of this documentary, because it triggered heated debates in my classroom, the documentary itself. So that was an exciting phenomenon to see how all this made it possible. All this meaning the pandemic.
Similarly to Jana, what you're saying about being able to bring people in on the video conferencing platform really enabled a lot of the masterclasses to happen. And there was a lot that went back and forth, both in terms of conversations I had with my students, but also in terms of what went on in the Q&A relating to dancing with each other in a room as opposed to dancing with people on screen. So there were the bringing two choreographers from Israel was totally possible with this platform. We didn't have there was no travel, organizing, people coming so far for just a very short residency, any visa issues, that was not part of what we needed to negotiate. But one of the things for us that we were starting to think about was, what does this offer versus what are the things that we're missing? And so much of it, because the way that the master classes worked for the choreographers I brought in, was that we were not in a room together with the person on the screen, but we were on our own screens in our own spaces, which is a little bit different, I think, than if we had all been in the same room and we had brought the person in. Because we were all in our own space, the guest artist could make assumptions about, we were all alone, we had the relationship with the screen, instead of knowing that person knowing that, their face was being projected to a room full of eager people. That was not the case. One thing that actually did work really well. So overall, yes, it is better to dance together. And I think that's one of the exciting things that has come out of this, is that there are so many things that you can do with a masterclass on a screen. And for so long, we're used to like yoga videos and sweating to the oldies and all of those like dance video, instructional dance videos that happened for a long time. And I think that our relationship with that kind of dance and movement instruction will change in a sense of having both and. If I want this kind of experience, I can access it in this way. If I know that I want to be in a room with other people, truly feeling the kinesthetic like sparks of connection between people, then I'm going to show up physically in a space and be with other people. Because one of the things that even I was kind of talking with my students about in the fall was, how can we still feel that kinesthetic body connection to other people, even through the screen? And at the end of the day, sure, it's like an imaginary, like you know what it feels like to physically be with people, and then you kind of translate, you transfer that to being by yourself and like imagining that feeling being with, like there's all kinds of ways that we were trying to think about it. The screen is a portal, it is not but at the end of the day, and the students felt this and the artists felt this too, that it does, dancing with people through video conferencing does not replace dancing in a studio. But some things that came through that were really great discoveries about opportunities for what this could do actually was Alon Carniel's Feldenkrais class, because so much of the way that practice transfers from the instructor to the students, and particularly in the way that Carniel teaches, is that we were all more or less lying supine on our floors, and he guided us through instructions to do with our bodies. So even though he was watching people who had their cameras on, so he could kind of cue in certain ways based on what he was seeing, when I, closed my eyes and followed his directions about where to put my knee, where to slide my hand, how to figure out the relationship of my hip to this, that, and the other thing, it was as if he was right there telling me, and I was lying on the floor, and I imagined being with many other people. And he was, when he and I were chatting afterwards, he did say that doing Feldenkrais over the video conference has not lost as much as doing other kinds of movement practice over the video conference, because when you're in class, it's a solo practice, you're being guided, you may as well be on the floor with 50 other people as on the floor by yourself. So that was really exciting to learn, like, aha, this is a good match. And, you know, we could Zoom him in from Tel Aviv and that was okay. But some of the other movement practices, really, we had to be a little bit creative in really feeling connected. But certainly finding the kinds of movement practices that worked well was exciting. And also, for the first time, teaching at 8:30 in the morning has its benefits when you want to Zoom people in from a 7-hour time difference ahead of you. So that was that was good. Working the other way, you know, working with the West Coast, we had to, you know, move a little as to when we could do it. But, you know, figuring out that time difference also felt like a way to really connect a little bit more broadly in terms of, you know, we're here, you're there, we're doing this together, we're at, you know, different kind of geographical points and also different times of the day. So that was kind of interesting to figure out, what does it mean to dance together when we're in such diverse locales geographically and temporally?
I can relate to that for sure. My class was at 9:30 in the morning, and that was just about on the verge of when the hip hop group was willing to come. It was a little early in the evening for them to give a concert, but they were okay with it. I hope you won't mind, Hannah, if I mention something about Feldenkrais, although that wasn't my event. I was a participant in that workshop. And something I experienced was that I could be with others, but also have privacy. And that's been an interesting thing about taking dance and yoga and all of that in Zoom this year, that there's a sense of being together, but also being able to be in my own space and with my own body while I'm thinking through, you know, some of the ways of moving and being that, you know, we don't usually get to have both at the same time. So, and that is something that surprised me with the hip hop concert too, that there was the possibility for intimacy, actually. That really surprised me. What didn't surprise me was that a music concert isn't the same in Zoom as it is in person. Okay, we all knew that was going to happen, right? But I asked my students if they were willing and comfortable to turn on their cameras, and only a few people did, but the ones that did, you know, and we put it in gallery view, they were up and moving and dancing, or they were trying to show their engagement. They were working on it. They were actually consciously trying to give the musicians feedback. And I think, again, in a crowd, you can kind of get lost in, it's like, whether you're jumping up and down or singing or whatever, you know, it just kind of adds to that collective effervescence. But on the screen, when one person makes an effort to show that they're participating, you know, it's lovely. It's like a gift. So that surprised me in a good way. And finally, the last thing that was a benefit was that, again, I could use this for 3 different classes. That never would have happened in I could record it, you know, and not only did I invite all 3 classes, but then I could put it on my Carmen pages for all 3 classes and assign something, you know, give a reflection assignment to each class. So that was really, and it still exists. I can keep using it in my classes, you know. So it's not a one-time occurrence.
Yeah. Danielle, what you were talking about in terms of your students kind of volunteering themselves and trying to give the musicians feedback. One of the things that I've been interested to watch over the course of the pandemic really is how we have learned to be audiences for each other. And also, like, you know, as speakers, as lecturers, as performers or whatever, how do we perform in this space? Right. So how much control do I have? How much do I want to give up? You know, am I going to get Zoom bombed? As a listener, like, am I giving feedback? Am I, like, my face has become so animated to just try to, you know, share in the excitement of the presenter, because it can be very difficult to lecture in front of a bunch of, you know, black boxes on the screen. Any final thoughts from this project or from your experiences over this past year, just very quickly, about how you think audiences have changed, and if you think that's a temporary change or is it something more long-term?
You're muted, Yana.
I think it's a long-term change. Maybe it will disappear over years, but not right away. We have gained some insight into flexibility which technology gave us. We just, all of us acknowledge that. At the same time, we have also regretted being with people and dancing among people or talking face to face. So I believe that we are learning, and we have learned what this virtual communication and experience can offer us. And we will take some of it in the future for sure. We all have been part of conversations about the future of conferences, academic conferences, right? How much are they going to be virtual and how much are they going to be in person, and what's missing from the virtual experience. And it is mostly the dominant opinion is the human interaction, the networking, the coffee breaks, right? When you meet colleagues or you have lunch and want to come up with a new project. So while all this has given us opportunities to really engage more and invite more people and meet more people, has offered opportunities for all of us. And even as just spectators, streaming from all possible applications and streaming services, and having everything available on the tips of our fingers. At the same time, there is an aspect which we have missed, all of us, I think, and that's the human interaction.
I agree with that, Jana. Really having the human interaction dimension. And I think going forward, there's going to be a choice and a balance about what kind of event do we want this to be? Does it need to be human interactive? Will we be best served by doing, a webinar where a lot of people can access it? We can do a Q&A. Do people really need to be in the same room together? Or, do people need to be in the same room together? Then, how can we make that happen? One of the things that I also have been thinking about is as a kind of point of learning and how to bring this forward is expectations of audiences. What kinds of expectations do I have of audience behavior during a particular event? It is never what I expect it to be. And so between, participating in the chat, participating with cameras on or off, participating with cameras off, but mute off, like speaking enabled with chat, what are those different things? Is it a webinar where the Q&A happens a very particular way within, the Zoom platform? Or is it a meeting where, there's a little bit more one-on-one immediate participation from audiences? But then also, as people who are, presenting the event or organizing it in some way, what are the ways that we expect audiences to behave based on the way that the event appears to be set up? And what do we hope for? And if what happens is not what we hope for, is that okay? How can we stay flexible? What do we do next time if we're like, oh, we actually had hoped for this kind of engagement? Okay, so then how do we set it up for next time? Those are the things that I have been thinking about in terms of, what are our expectations for the ways that audiences engage? And then how then do we set something up with the cues? Now that we've all kind of figured it out, the basic things will always evolve and change, but how do we then signal the kinds of ways to engage?
Yeah, I really agree with that too. I'm also thinking about the kind of kindness that we've been seeing this year. A lot of people are asking now, is this accessible for you? Is this doable for you? Do you have Zoom exhaustion? Do you need a break? Can you hear me well? Can you see me well? Would you rather use the chat? Are you comfortable with this? And these are not questions that we were necessarily asking in the classroom. And so I want to keep that. I'm thrilled with that. And I also like the idea of like less is maybe a little bit more sometimes. Like, oh, we could do this symposium in 3 hours instead of in 3 days. And you know, we don't have to ask so much of each other, that we would travel across the world, you know, and the environmental impact of that. You know, there's so much we can do online, and it's true that we don't want to do it all online. But I like that we might keep some of that attentiveness to like caring for each other and ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me, there's a connection, there's a relationship between access and sustainability. So increased access, which is kind of global in nature, but also interpersonal, like you were saying, Danielle, in terms of asking, you know, is this how you want to participate? Do you have the tools that you need to participate if you want to participate? But then also a kind of, I think that there's going to be a reinvestment in the local, right? Because if we're spreading ourselves across the globe, that's a lot of energy expenditure. And so I think that we are going to see a lot of those deeper connections more locally. And I think that that will be really exciting to see that develop as well. You know, in this past year where it hasn't mattered whether you were 5 blocks away, 5 miles away, 500 miles away, like there has been something capacious about that and really has opened something up. And there's also a cost there. So I'm interested to see what the balancing out will look like. All right, thank you so much. Thank you to the Global Arts and Humanities Discovery Theme for funding audiences and online reception before and after COVID. And thank you so much to all of my co-conveners here today. It has been a long year. I don't think that we anticipated that the way we close out the year is kind of the way we opened it. But I was very delighted to be involved in this project with you all. So thanks for joining.
Thank you. This has been fantastic.
Thank you. I appreciate it.